Hi, I'm Veronica Gale. Welcome to the Student Voice. Today we are here with Dr. Toback, and we will be discussing some popular topics that have been discussed recently in Wayne. Welcome, Dr. Toback.
Thank you, Veronica. Very happy to be here today.
So our first question, if we get block scheduling, how will it work?
Okay. So block scheduling, it takes a little time to explain, but ultimately it's something that exists in many school districts. It's something that may be of benefit here in Wayne. So we've really been working on the concept of block scheduling last year, a little bit in the prior year, and there's a lot of work being done this year and also next year if it moves ahead. So we're at the stage where ultimately a decision will be made about whether or not we're going to move ahead. But what it looks like is basically this. Ultimately you would still have 8 classes, and there's a rotation. So the type of block schedule we're talking about is not a true block, it's a rotating block. And what that means is during the course of the day, your classes would change. So on Monday, your rotation would be different than Tuesday. And what would happen is during the day, you would have 58-minute periods, you would have a 58-minute lunch, and then 2 of the classes that you have would be dropped. So what that means is basically for students who say in the morning, right, say they have a hard time, paying attention in the morning, and so they say, well, listen, I really have this hard math class and it's first period and it's tough to, to really do my best because my math class is first period. Well, that problem goes away because ultimately there's a rotation. So that class will eventually be a mid-morning class, it'll be an afternoon class, it rotates every day. So your schedule looks a little bit different every day. Your classes move around to different time periods during the day, and so that's one of the advantages. The 58-minute lunch period is something that I think a lot of students would really like. But again, we're not, no one's being force-fed a block schedule. Ultimately, this is a big topic. There are many districts that have block scheduling, many that don't. And so we're really looking at what's the best thing for the high school students in Wayne. And we have a lot of people involved in that process.
It seems really great. Also, like with lates and stuff, seems like it would help eliminate lates to one class, like first period lates.
Yep, the rotation makes for a lot of students, I think the rotation is a big attraction.
It seems really good. How will this block scheduling affect lunch periods or lab classes?
Okay, so what's different about a block schedule is you have something called a unit lunch. Okay, so the unit lunch is lunch for everybody. So yes, lunch is much longer than what it is now. It's 58 minutes, and everybody is scheduled for lunch. So there's a lot of facility work that we would need to do to create enough seating space for all the students. We would spread out lunch. There would be different service areas that would be included throughout the high school. So perhaps some of our gyms would be used for lunch service areas, and that would all be cleaned up, and everyone goes back to business once lunch is over. So that's kind of the basics of how lunch would work.
That seems good. Okay. How come we have to wake up so early for school while other towns don't have to come in this early?
Okay. So that's a very good question. That's a question that has been asked many times over, and it's something that lingers on. I know there's plenty of research that shows that teens definitely do better, right? They do better if the school day is a little bit later. But there are logistical problems with that. So the schedule that you have here at Wayne Hills is a schedule that's been in place for a long time. 7:20 in the morning, anywhere near that is a pretty early start to a school day. But I think that there's a few things, like I said, that you have to really think about. One is, one of the reasons that people say, well, the school day should start later, the kids already have such a long day. Ultimately, I know that many of our high-performing students really put in every day, just about a 16-hour day. When you add in your activities, if they're involved in athletics, they're involved in the school day, and then all the homework that goes along with it, ultimately they have about a 16-hour day. So even if you push that day to be a little bit later, the fact is instead of going to sleep at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock, now you're talking about going to sleep at 1 in the morning, which is also a problem. I think that would also be a bit much. So I think there's a lot of pressure on teenagers today to perform. There's a lot of pressure on students to do their best in school. So with that comes a lot of homework. And so like I said, I question how that would help people if ultimately you still have to put the same amount of hours in, and now you're going to sleep even later than what you do now. I think that's a tough thing. The other issue is ultimately with things like athletics, depending on how far you move it, that has an impact because ultimately with athletics, like for example, this time of the year, the sun goes down a lot earlier, right? So the tail end of fall season, there are a lot of things that you need to be concerned about as far as a schedule. So I guess my main point is that if a lot of other schools did it, then it would make sense. Otherwise, we would be kind of like, if Wayne went ahead with a schedule like that, there would be a lot of things that would be happening in other schools. Whenever we're involved in competition, whether it's an academic competition or an athletic competition, a lot of those things start early in the day. And so that would also probably present some problems if there was one district that went with that change. But if a lot of districts did that, that would be another story. There are some districts that did make changes. There are a lot of districts that have moved ahead with some minor changes. So 15 minutes, 20 minutes, things like that. But I'm not sure how much that really helps anybody if you change the schedule by 15 minutes.
That makes sense. After the break, we will have Brandon Anderson with Dr. Toback discussing more about the future of the Wayne School District.
Did you know that every year $11.5 billion is spent on cleaning up litter in America alone? With that amount of money, one could give every man, woman, and child in Canada $319.44.
Enough to buy 377 middle schools or buy 10 million new iPhones. So why spend all that money on cleaning up litter, which we can prevent?
In 2012, over 10 million pounds of litter were picked up on beaches in 97 countries. And if that number goes up, we might not have beautiful sandy beaches in the future. Instead, the sand will be filled with trash and the ocean will be brown and smelly.
The weight of all that trash is equal to over 10 large-sized airplanes, or the trash is over 22 times the weight of the Statue of Liberty. All it takes to stop littering is to walk a few extra steps and put your trash in the trash can.
And that easy step can keep our world pretty and save tons of money that can be used elsewhere. For more information, go to stoplittering.com.
Just remember, if you stop littering and always throw out your trash, you're making a huge impact to help our Earth.
Welcome back to the Student Voice. I'm Brandon Anderson. As students, we're interested to know more about, what's going on with the school district, especially what affects us as high schoolers. So we gathered a few questions for you.
Great.
How do you think Wayne does on college prep for students?
Well, as far as the district overall, I think the district does a phenomenal job. I think, first of all, there are many students that are interested in going to college, and the fact is that for the over 90% of students that choose to go to college, they all find a great school. So every year, it's impressive to me to look at. We put together an end-of-year publication that basically includes all the different college selections where they've been accepted, and so that list is always very impressive. I think that when you compare our SAT scores, I think that's an indication of college readiness, right? A lot of schools still, regardless of the fact that there are a number of schools that don't use SATs anymore or any standardized test, there are many schools that do, and so I think that the SAT performance is an important factor. That shows that there's college readiness here. And I think the other factor that shows a little bit about the quality of the education students receive in Wayne is all the different awards we receive. The district always receives these Newsweek awards or U.S. News and World Report top high schools. Washington Post named the school, both high schools, some of the most rigorous high schools of the United States. So when you compare the Wayne School District to schools across the country, I mean, we do very well.
Yeah, I think so too. Aside from scheduling, what is one thing you would change about our school district and the way it's run?
Well, there are a lot of things that I think that we're working on as a district. I know that the world that you will be in and the world that we will also be in, but you have to deal with this more, is the issue of technology, right? The technology issue in the school system is something, like I said, we have been working on. So that's something that, I think there's consensus in the district that we need to do more with technology. As far as funding programs, clubs and activities and things like that, I think that's also an area of focus. We want to make sure that we have ample numbers of clubs and activities for students. Although we do have a very nice selection, there is more. There is more. And I think overall the district the direction of the district is a positive direction. But the other thing that we operate on is we have a leadership team that really depends on other people for consensus, for ideas and things like that. So I know that at the elementary level, there's a big push by teachers, by parents, to bring in some new programs into the district. So there's some new programs we have for science, there's language arts, there's new math programs. So sort of the standardization of content is another topic that's important in the district at the elementary level in particular, and that's something that we've been working on too. So all said and done, I think there's a lot of different things that the district is doing to improve. But again, it's with consensus, with lots of other people thinking, hey, that these are things that we really need to do. So we listen to the people who go to school here, right? We listen to the students, and we do listen to what the teachers and the parents have to say.
Yeah, it's nice to know the students are heard a lot, and a lot of the parents, and everyone kind of gets to say in what goes on here. It's pretty nice to know.
We do what we can.
Yeah. Can you see Hills and Valley combining further down the line, just like the ice hockey team has?
I don't see that too much. Okay, what I do see is ultimately there was a situation that we were confronted with as a district where ultimately the future of ice hockey at the high school level was something that was kind of in question, right? And the reason it was in question is because you have students who, as far as the number of players that you need for a varsity team, we just didn't have it. Both high schools really suffered from experienced players, right? That we didn't have them. And so what would have happened this year is without the combination of the teams, you would have been fielding or actually putting on ice skates freshmen in varsity competition. It would have been reliant on freshman players who are not necessarily ready for varsity competition. And so it's a very difficult situation to put anyone into a situation where they're really not ready for. So that would have been the reality. So the idea of the combined team came up. There are many communities that do that. And I guess my main point is that unless there's a situation where ultimately we would have to say, bring an end to a sport or stop, playing a sport, we wouldn't do everything we can to avoid that. And this is the solution to that particular problem with ice hockey.
Yeah. With the new governor coming into office, do you think in any way that he'll affect our school district personally?
I would say that that remains to be determined. It's hard to say. I know that the new governor has committed to increasing aid to public schools, which is a big thing for us, is ultimately the state aid. So if our state aid situation improves, then ultimately our budget will improve. And that will indirectly, it will have some effect on the high school, though it's hard to say exactly how that would play out. With the new governor coming in, there will also be a new commissioner of education, new people at the Department of Education, and so perhaps some new directions, some new things that the state will be doing as far as different initiatives and things like that may come into play, but it's too early to say how that's going to actually look here in Wayne.
That's fair. It's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
When we come back from the break, Veronica will discuss more about what's going on in Wayne with Dr. Toback.
Okay.
Did you know that on average 9 billion tons of garbage end up in the ocean every year?
Many people don't pay attention to it, but in reality, it is giving a huge impact on planet Earth and affecting us in our daily lives. It is also becoming very expensive to clean up after. Around $11.5 billion on average is spent yearly to help clean up the litter.
Also, 50% of this litter is cigarette butts alone. There are only a few people who dispose correctly of their cigarette butts. Many people do admit to littering at some point in their lives, but what people don't understand is that if people keep littering, that can be just a small amount of the billions of tons of litter recorded at the end of every year.
Even though many cigarette butts are found with litter, the most common litter seen around is from fast food restaurants. For more information, visit our littering awareness website at www.hampton.gov.
Welcome back. Now we have a few more random questions for Dr. Toback. So our first question, why do we have to take both the PARCC and the SAT and ACT?
Okay. So the answer is technically you don't. Right? The fact is there is a requirement for the PARCC, right? That's something that's in place. That will be a graduation requirement, right? But the SAT and the ACT are something you take for yourselves, right? Ultimately for college acceptances and things like that. So there is a lot of standardized testing, and I think your question is more about all the standardized testing and why, on top of taking the SAT and on top of taking the PARCC, and the ACT, do we have to have the PARCC as well? So the interesting part about that is there are other states that use the SAT. They use the SAT as a graduation requirement. They use it as their standardized test for graduation. So, maybe that's something that happens in the future, because I know that is an issue at all grade levels. The PARCC is definitely something that was not well received here in Wayne, right? We still have a good number of students that refuse to take it, so there's cases of refusal that still go on. And I know that there's a lot of people questioning the value of the test. I would say as far as standardized testing goes, ultimately, whether you're working as an architect or an attorney, there's all sorts of different types of tests. There's all sorts of different types of professional development that you have in your career where you're going to be taking computer-based tests. And so it's good to be used to it. It's good to be accustomed to doing that at the college level, because it's something that also comes your way at the college level. So there is some value in taking the test. And the other thing that I think a lot of people don't see, and because we have so many students that have decided not to take the test, they're refusing to take the test at the high school level, what you don't see is the impact that we see in terms of all this information we get back. We know the information that we get back at the high school level isn't as helpful as what it is at the elementary and the middle school level, where we do have much higher levels of participation. Okay, so what I mean by that is ultimately the school district does receive a tremendous amount of information about student performance when they do take the PARCC. So that is a big enhancement over what we had previously with the state's testing program. So all that information we have, we take it, we package it, we provide it back to teachers, and we discover ways that we can improve our programs. So whether it means changes to the curriculum, things that maybe we're not doing as well with, those are areas that we can identify, and we can use that information, but it's harder to do at the high school level. The other thing that's interesting about it is ultimately teacher performance is also connected to the park. So in some cases, it doesn't help a classroom teacher who's doing a good job, and then you have, if the students decide not to take the test, well, sometimes the statistical information that comes back about the teacher isn't the best, because ultimately if there's a lot of students that opt out of the test or decide not to take the test, their performance is evaluated, like I said, based on student performance, which is sometimes a tough thing to have happen.
Seems like it's very beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the park test helps students prepare for college?
Well, like I said, I mentioned before a little bit about the, it's a standardized test, like many other standardized tests. There's lots of standardized tests that you have in life, whether it includes going into law school, or if you want to go to medical school. All that is predicated on performance on standardized tests. So there's a benefit there. And as I mentioned before, with all the information you get back, there's a benefit to the district. So when we have good information about student performance, we can turn that into improvements for the school system. And that's something that we really try to do. So those are some things that the park does for us that are good things.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
What improvements do you think will be made in the foreseeable future to the learning environment for both students and staff?
Well, that's that's a good question. I mentioned a little bit before about the technology, providing additional resources, new textbooks, things like that. Those are all things we're working on. The other thing that we're working on is we're putting together. We have a STEM initiative going on, and at the high school level, a lot of that is facilities work. So we have new science labs coming to the district. So all of the science labs within the next few years at both high schools are going to be replaced or renovated with new science labs with all the bells and whistles as far as technology and everything like that. So that'll be a nice improvement. That'll be a great improvement for our students. And we know that the labs that you have are, in many cases, they're somewhere around 50 years old. Maybe there's been some different improvements here and there, but mostly they're original. They're original to the construction of the school. So it's time to make some changes with our science program.
Seems awesome.
Mm-hmm.
What is your stance on what people say about how we should get rid of physical education to make the day shorter, or so students can come into school later?
Mm-hmm. Well, honestly, in some ways, it doesn't really matter what I think about that, because ultimately it's still a state requirement.
True.
And so, as far as if any change were to happen at the state level, I suppose we would go along with it. And if there's enough momentum to make that kind of change, I think that the other factor is there's a lot that students learn through competition. So questions in a school, sometimes people say, well, why do we have a sports program? Why do we pay all this money? People sometimes ask these questions for sports teams. And so, but there's a benefit, right? I think everyone recognizes, either while you're playing or after you're playing, well, by playing a sport or being involved in an activity, the idea of competition and working with others, there are things that you learn by doing that. That's why schools still offer sports programs, right? There's a lot to be learned by participating on a sports team. And also there's a lot to be learned by participating in physical education. Teamwork, things like that are all things that everyone needs to know about, everyone needs to be aware of. And I think that by getting rid of something like physical education, there are some important life lessons, and also just general lessons about sports and activities, different things you could do for your health, right? There's a lot of students, there's a lot of adults that have issues with their health, right? And a lot of it has to do with inactivity. So the fact that you have a physical education program means that at least a certain amount of time will be dedicated, pretty much every day, to some kind of physical activity, which is important for you as well. So I think that basically a movement to get rid of physical education is maybe a little short-sighted.
I like that. All right, so last question. This has
Okay.
been a big hot topic
Yes.
with the junior class.
I'm
Are
sure.
you ready?
Yes.
Why did you guys give the freshmen and sophomores laptops and not the juniors and seniors?
Okay, so that is a painful question. It's a difficult thing. So ultimately, we know that the idea of providing students with laptops has really been something that has been in the work for at least 10 years here in Wayne. Okay, so there's a whole history to this. And at different times, for different reasons, the program, the idea started, it stopped, it started, it stopped. In the meantime, there are high schools that the students have had laptops, really for over a decade. So this has been something that many high schools have had for years, having laptops. In our case, in an ideal world, certainly in an ideal world, everyone would have a laptop right now. Everyone would have their Chromebook, and everyone would live happily ever after. In our particular situation, finances are an issue. So we had some options. One of the options, the other option, was to provide one high school with laptops and not the other, and then do the other high school the following year. But I think that anyone could understand how that would be a very difficult thing. So, and how do you decide that? You flip a coin. There's no way that would be a good idea. People would feel. I'm sure there would be a lot of high school. There would be an entire high school, and their parents that would feel that they've been shortchanged, right? So, so the decision was based on finances that we would go ahead and at least get this started. So we have at least 2 grade levels that are covered. We can move forward with the next year and finish the project. Sometimes things take more than 1 year. We've had, for example, at the elementary level and the middle school level, we've had really 3 years to bring a new math program into the district. So it's not like, like all these things can always happen at once due to funding. We just, there's only so much the district can do. And so it's a difficult thing. And I know that there are probably some juniors that are not happy about it, and I understand that.
Thank you for watching. We would like to thank Dr. Toback for joining us here at Wayne Hills today. Check back for more episodes of the Student Voice throughout the year.